You could hear the bones snap over the roaring engines of the Black Hawk helicopters. 282 hardened soldiers froze in dead silence. A full-bird colonel was on his knees, screaming in agony, while a 5'7" female Navy SEAL stood over him, still holding his twisted arm. The unforgiving sun beating down on Camp Phoenix in Al Anbar Province, Iraq, had a way of boiling a person's blood before the day even truly began. It was 2019, and the air was perpetually thick, with the smell of JP-8 jet fuel, burnt coffee, and the metallic tang of fine desert dust. This was a forward operating base where careers were made in the shadows and buried in the sand. For Lieutenant Chloe Harper, it was supposed to be the ultimate proving ground. Chloe wasn't just a Navy SEAL. She was an anomaly in a world constructed entirely of and for men. Earning the gold trident that sat pinned to her uniform hadn't been a matter of meeting quotas. During Hell Week in the freezing waters of Coronado, California, she had fractured 3 toes during a log carry. She didn't report it. She taped them together in the dead of night, swallowed the bile rising in her throat from the pain, and ran another 15 miles. She had survived the surf torture, the sleep deprivation, and the suffocating scrutiny of instructors who desperately wanted her to ring the brass bell and quit. She never did. But earning the trident was one thing. Earning the respect of the Joint Special Operations Task Force in an active war zone was another entirely. The task force was commanded by Colonel Gregory Hale. Hale was a man carved from old-school military doctrine. He had a Silver Star from Fallujah, 3 bitter ex-wives back in the States, and a deeply ingrained, violently stubborn belief that women belonged in support roles, not kicking down doors in Tier 1 counterterrorism units. From the moment Chloe stepped off the C-17 Globemaster onto the tarmac of Camp Phoenix, Hale had painted a target on her back. He didn't do it overtly at first. The military is a political machine, and Hale knew better than to file an official grievance without cause. Instead, he waged a psychological war of attrition. He weaponized microaggressions. During joint briefings in the Tactical Operations Center, Hale would deliberately skip over Chloe's intelligence reports regarding local insurgent movements, opting instead to ask her subordinate, Petty Officer First Class Daniel Brody, to verify her findings. "Brody," Hale would say, leaning over the plywood table, his eyes never leaving Chloe, "are we sure this is the right grid coordinate, or did the lieutenant misread the topography map again?" Brody, a 6'2" powerhouse from Texas who had bled beside Chloe in Afghanistan, would stiffen. "The lieutenant's coordinates are perfectly accurate, sir. I've verified them myself, per her exact instructions." Hale would just smirk, a thin, patronizing curve of his lips. Good to know someone is double-checking. Chloe absorbed the insults like Kevlar taking shrapnel. She never broke bearing. She never raised her voice. She knew the burden she carried. If a male officer made a mistake, it was chalked up to the chaos of war. If she made a mistake, it would be held up as definitive, irrefutable proof that women couldn't handle the job. She had to be flawless. But Hale's animosity began to escalate beyond petty remarks in the briefing room. He started assigning her platoon the trash missions, while the Rangers and Delta operators were given high-value target HVT raids with full air support. Chloe's element was repeatedly tasked with low-level route clearance and investigating empty, booby-trapped compounds. It was dangerous, thankless work designed to exhaust her team and break her spirit. One evening, in the base's makeshift gym, a rusted tin shed filled with welded iron and heavy bags, the tension finally breached the surface. Chloe was on the bench press, pushing out heavy reps, spotted by Master Chief Wyatt Reynolds, a 20-year veteran who viewed Chloe like a daughter and fought like a demon. Hale walked in with 2 of his staff officers. He stopped by the water cooler, loud enough for the entire gym to hear. "You know," Hale said, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls, "I heard they lowered the physical standards at Bud-S just to get some good PR for the Pentagon. Makes you wonder who you can trust when the bullets start flying. I need operators, not political experiments." The gym went dead silent. The clanking of iron stopped. 20 massive, tattooed operators paused, their eyes darting between the colonel and the lieutenant. Chloe racked the barbell. The metal clanged sharply against the supports. She sat up, wiping the sweat from her forehead with a towel, and looked directly at Hale. Her face was an emotionless mask. "Colonel," Chloe said, her voice calm, carrying effortlessly across the room. With all due respect, the only thing lowered around here is the quality of our mission intel. If you have a concern about my platoon's combat readiness, I suggest you take it up with me in a tactical capacity, not over a water cooler. Hale's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. A vein throbbed at his temple. A junior lieutenant did not speak to a colonel that way, especially not in front of enlisted men. He took a step forward, his fists clenched, but he caught the icy glare of Master Chief Reynolds, who had casually shifted his weight, his arms crossed over his massive chest. Hale swallowed his rage, masking it with a sneer. "We'll see how ready you are, Lieutenant. Enjoy your workout. It might be your last easy day." He stormed out. Chloe laid back down on the bench. "You poked the bear, LT," Reynolds muttered, gripping the bar for her next set. "The bear was already awake, Master Chief," Chloe replied, her eyes cold. "Let's get back to work." She didn't know it then, but Hale had just decided to stop playing games. He was going to set her up to fail, no matter the cost. 3 days later, the trap was sprung. Operation Sandstrike was supposed to be a routine snatch and grab on the outskirts of Ramadi. Intelligence suggested a mid-level insurgent financier was moving through a rural compound. Hale bypassed the usual rotation and specifically assigned Chloe's SEAL element to the raid. In the briefing room, Chloe reviewed the operational parameters and immediately saw the glaring holes. "Sir," Chloe said, pointing a laser at the satellite imagery on the screen, "this compound is situated in a basin. It's surrounded by 3 elevated ridges. It's a textbook kill zone. We need ISR drone overwatch, and I want an Apache gunship on standby for immediate close air support." Hale, sitting at the head of the table, didn't even look at the screen. He was busy cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. "Request denied, Lieutenant. ISR assets are currently tasked to a ranger operation up north, and the Apaches are grounded for maintenance. You have your orders. Get in, grab the target, and get out. Unless, of course, you think this is too much for you." The room tightened. Captain Arthur Mitchell, a logistical officer, cleared his throat nervously. "Colonel, putting an element in that basin without eyes in the sky is highly irregular." "I didn't ask for your tactical assessment, Captain," Hale snapped. He looked at Chloe, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Execute the mission, Lieutenant Harper. That's a direct order." Chloe knew it was a suicide run, but refusing a direct order would mean an immediate court-martial, stripping her of her trident, and giving Hale exactly what he wanted the end of her career. "Understood, sir," Chloe said quietly. That night, Chloe and her team boarded the heavily armored MRAPs and rolled out into the pitch-black Iraqi desert. The tension in the vehicle was suffocating. Every man in that truck knew they were flying blind into a potential meat grinder, and they knew exactly who had put them there. They hit the compound at 0200 hours. The breach was quiet. They moved like ghosts through the courtyard, night vision goggles painting the world in washed-out green. But the compound was empty. No target, no guards, just a single flickering kerosene lantern on a table. "LT," Brody whispered over the comms, his voice tight. "This feels wrong. It's a ghost town." Before Chloe could order the fallback, the night erupted. The elevated ridges surrounding the compound lit up with the muzzle flashes of heavy PKM machine guns and RPGs. They had walked right into a coordinated ambush. The noise was deafening, a chaotic, tearing sound that ripped through the mud brick walls of the compound. "Contact right! Contact right!" Chloe screamed into her radio, returning fire with her suppressed M4. "Base, this is Team Trident. We are in a heavy troops in contact situation. We are pinned down by elevated heavy weapons. Requesting immediate QRF and air support? Over." Static hissed back. Then Hale's voice, cool and detached, came over the net. "Trident, this is actual. Stand by. We are assessing your request." "Assessing?" An RPG slammed into the wall just 3 feet from where Brody was laying down suppressive fire. The explosion threw him backward like a rag doll. Chloe didn't hesitate. She sprinted across the open courtyard under a hail of tracer rounds, grabbed Brody by the drag handle of his plate carrier, and hauled his 220-pound frame behind a burned-out Hilux pickup truck. Brody was bleeding from a shrapnel wound to his shoulder, but he was alive. For 45 agonizing minutes, Chloe's team fought a desperate, bloody holding action. They exhausted their grenades, their smoke, and nearly all their ammunition. Chloe orchestrated the defense brilliantly, bounding her men back section by section, keeping the enemy pinned just enough to prevent them from overrunning their position. Through sheer grit and tactical supremacy, she managed to exfiltrate her entire team back to the MRAPs and break contact. They returned to Camp Phoenix as the sun was rising. They were battered, bloody, and running purely on adrenaline and rage. News of the botched raid and the lack of support had already spread through the base like wildfire. When Chloe's battered MRAPs rolled onto the tarmac, an unnatural stillness fell over the camp. Hale had called an emergency mass debrief in the main aircraft hangar. 282 personnel, Rangers, SEALs, Night Stalkers, and support staff were formed up in tight ranks. The hangar was massive, smelling of grease and hot metal. Hale stood on a wooden podium at the front, his face a mask of furious indignation. He needed a scapegoat for the intelligence failure, and he was ready to serve Chloe to the wolves. As Chloe marched her exhausted, soot-covered team into the hangar, the ranks parted for them. She stood at the front, directly below Hale's podium. Brody, his shoulder heavily bandaged, stood faithfully to her right. "Lieutenant Harper," Hale's voice boomed over the PA system, dripping with contempt. "You have compromised a massive intelligence network. You let a high-value target slip through your fingers, and you nearly got your men killed through sheer tactical incompetence." Chloe stood at parade rest, her eyes locked straight ahead. "Colonel, the intelligence was faulty. It was an ambush. We were engaged by a platoon-sized element with elevated heavy weapons. I requested support, and it was denied." Hale marched down the wooden steps of the podium, closing the distance between them. The hangar was so quiet you could hear the sand blowing against the corrugated steel outside. "You requested support because you panicked," Hale spat, stopping less than a foot from her face. "You lost your nerve. This is exactly what I warned Command about. You don't have the stomach for this. You're a liability, Harper. You are a little girl playing dress-up in a man's uniform." The insult hung in the air. Master Chief Reynolds gripped his rifle so hard his knuckles turned white. Brody took a half step forward, but Chloe subtly put her hand out, stopping him. "With respect, sir," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low, calm octave. "My team neutralized 12 hostiles and exfiltrated without a single KIA. I suggest you review the helmet cam footage before you question my combat effectiveness." Hale's eyes went wild. The sheer disrespect of a subordinate talking back to him in front of 282 soldiers shattered his fragile ego. He lost complete control. "Shut your mouth!" Hale roared. He didn't just yell. Blazing with unchecked fury and the arrogance of a man who believed his rank made him untouchable, Hale raised his right hand. He stepped into her space and forcefully lunged, his hand swinging down to grab her violently by the tactical vest, a move meant to physically shake her, to throw her off balance and humiliate her in front of the entire task force. It was a fatal miscalculation. Chloe Harper was not a politician. She was not a diplomat. She was a Tier 1 Navy SEAL, trained in advanced close-quarters combat, and a sudden, violent physical assault triggered an immediate, deeply ingrained muscle memory. Before Hale's hand could even close around her vest, Chloe moved. It happened in a fraction of a second. She pivoted on her left foot, stepping off his center line. Her left hand shot up, parrying his wrist with bone-jarring force. Simultaneously, her right hand clamped down on his forearm. With a fluid, vicious rotation of her hips, she applied a brutal Krav Maga joint lock, hyperextending Hale's elbow and driving her body weight downward. Crack. The sound of Colonel Hale's radius and ulna bones snapping echoed through the cavernous hangar like a gunshot. Hale let out a blood-curdling scream, his knees buckling instantly. Chloe didn't let go. She drove him straight into the concrete floor, pinning his twisted arm behind his back, her knee firmly planted on his spine. For 3 agonizing seconds, 282 heavily armed soldiers stood in absolute paralyzed shock. Weapons were halfway raised, eyes were wide. The invincible Colonel Hale was face down on the concrete, weeping in agony, while the woman he had tried to break held him utterly captive. The glass ceiling hadn't just been shattered. It had been weaponized, and the fallout was going to burn Camp Phoenix to the ground. The deafening silence inside the hangar was finally broken by the agonizing, wet sounds of Colonel Hale gasping for air on the concrete. 282 pairs of eyes remained fixed on Lieutenant Chloe Harper. She didn't look down at the man writhing at her boots. She slowly stood up, adjusted the collar of her plate carrier, and snapped into perfect parade rest.
Medic!
Master Chief Wyatt Reynolds roared, his voice finally shattering the paralysis that gripped the room. Get a corpsman up here now. Two medics sprinted from the back of the formation, dropping their kits next to the shattered colonel. As they began stabilizing his grotesquely angled arm, a squad of military police pushed through the crowd, their hands resting cautiously on their holstered sidearms. Lieutenant Harper, the lead MP said, his voice trembling slightly. He was a young corporal who suddenly found himself arresting a Tier 1 operator in a room full of furious SEALs. By order of the acting base commander, you are to be relieved of your weapons and confined to your quarters pending a formal JAG investigation. Brody took a massive step forward, dropping his hand toward his sidearm, his eyes flashing with lethal intent. A dozen SEALs from Chloe's platoon shifted their weight in unison, closing the gap behind her. The atmosphere in the hangar instantly shifted from shock to a powder keg on the verge of a bloodbath. "Stand down, Brody," Chloe ordered, her voice sharp and authoritative. She unclipped her holster and handed her sidearm to the MP, followed by her rifle. "No one does anything stupid. That is an order." She let the MPs escort her out. As she walked down the center aisle of the hangar, not a single operator looked away. The Rangers, the Night Stalkers, the support clerks, they all parted for her, their eyes filled with a terrifying, silent respect. Chloe was locked in her containerized housing unit. For 4 sweltering days, the metal box in the Iraqi desert felt like an oven, but the political heat back in Washington was burning even hotter. Striking a superior officer, let alone breaking a full bird colonel's arm, was a violation of Article 90 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The maximum penalty was dishonorable discharge and years in Fort Leavenworth. The Pentagon sent their top attack dog, Major Thomas Griffin, a ruthless Judge Advocate General, JAG, investigator known for making quiet problems disappear. Griffin sat across from Chloe at a small metal table in the interrogation room. He slid a piece of paper across the steel surface. "Let's be pragmatic, Lieutenant," Griffin said smoothly, folding his hands. "You assaulted a decorated colonel in front of an entire battalion. Your career is over. But if you sign this resignation, I can guarantee a general discharge under honorable conditions. No prison time. You go home quietly. You keep your freedom." Chloe looked at the paper, then up at Griffin. Her eyes were like ice. "He didn't just insult me, Major. He lunged at me in a hostile, unpredictable manner after orchestrating a botched raid meant to get my team killed. I applied standard defensive countermeasures." Griffin sighed, rubbing his temples. "Countermeasures? You snapped his arm like a twig, Harper. Hale claims he was merely reaching for your radio to relieve you of command. It's his word, a colonel with a silver star against yours. The Pentagon doesn't want a circus, but if you force a court-martial, they will crucify you to maintain the chain of command." "Then get the nails," Chloe said quietly, sliding the paper back across the table. "I want my day in court." What Griffin didn't know, what even Chloe didn't know, was that a quiet mutiny was brewing in the shadows of Camp Phoenix. Later that night, Captain Arthur Mitchell, the logistics officer who had been in the Tactical Operations Center during the disastrous raid, sat alone in the mess hall. His conscience was eating him alive. He had watched Hale deliberately leave an American team in the dirt, and now he was watching Hale try to send the woman who saved them to federal prison. Mitchell walked out of the mess hall and headed straight for the SEAL barracks. He found Master Chief Reynolds cleaning his rifle in the armory. "Master Chief," Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "the TOC records all comms and ambient audio during Tier 1 operations. Hale ordered the tech to delete the files from the raid." Reynolds stopped scrubbing the bolt carrier group. He looked up, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "And did they?" Mitchell reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted black USB drive. He placed it on the armory bench. "I pulled the server backups before the wipe command executed. Everything is on here. You didn't get this from me." Reynolds picked up the drive, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Captain, you just saved the lieutenant's life." 2 weeks later, a special military tribunal was convened at a secure CENTCOM facility in Kuwait. The room was sterile, paneled in dark wood, and heavily guarded. 3 stern-faced generals sat at the judge's bench. Colonel Gregory Hale sat at the prosecution's table, his arm encased in a heavy fiberglass cast, resting in a sling. He played the part of the wounded war hero perfectly, keeping his posture stiff and his expression somber. When Hale took the stand, he wove a masterful narrative of victimhood. Lieutenant Harper was hysterical, Hale testified, looking directly at the panel of generals. She had just botched a critical raid, allowing a high-value target to escape. When I confronted her about her tactical failures, she became insubordinate. I reached out to tap her tactical vest, attempting to ask for her radio so I could formally relieve her of command. Without warning, she violently assaulted me. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed colonel, nodded sympathetically. Colonel Hale, in your professional opinion, is Lieutenant Harper fit for duty in a Tier 1 element? Absolutely not, Hale replied, shaking his head. She is an emotional liability. She lacks the temperament and the discipline required of a Navy SEAL. Chloe sat silently next to her defense attorney, Commander David Ross. She showed zero emotion, her dress whites immaculate, the gold trident gleaming on her chest. When it was Commander Ross's turn to cross-examine, he stood up slowly and walked to the center of the floor. Colonel Hale, Ross began, his voice echoing in the quiet room. You claim the raid was botched due to Lieutenant Harper's incompetence. Yet, my client requested ISR drone overwatch and Apache air support before the mission, noting the compound was a textbook ambush site. Why were those requests denied? Hale scoffed, a rehearsed look of annoyance on his face. Assets were reallocated to higher priority targets, Commander. It's the reality of war. I see, Ross said. He turned to the judges. Permission to submit Defense Exhibit C into evidence and play it for the tribunal. The lead general frowned. What is Exhibit C, Commander? It is an unedited, encrypted audio backup from the Camp Phoenix Tactical Operations Center, recorded during the exact moment Lieutenant Harper's unit took heavy fire. Hale's face instantly drained of color. The smug arrogance vanished, replaced by a sudden hollow panic. He looked wildly at his own prosecutor, who looked utterly confused. Objection, the prosecutor shouted. We were not provided with this discovery. The prosecution wasn't provided with it because Colonel Hale ordered the original files deleted in a deliberate cover-up, which is a federal crime, Ross countered smoothly. Captain Arthur Mitchell, a logistics officer present in the TOC, preserved the backup. The room erupted into murmurs. The lead general slammed his gavel. Overruled. Play the audio. Ross connected the black USB drive to the courtroom's AV system. Static filled the speakers, followed by the chaotic, terrifying sounds of the ambush. Base, this is Team Trident. We are in a heavy troops in contact situation. We are pinned down by elevated heavy weapons, requesting immediate QRF and air support. Over. Chloe's voice screamed through the speakers, backed by the deafening roar of heavy machine gun fire. Then, the ambient microphone in the TOC picked up the room's audio. Colonel, we have Apaches on standby 3 minutes out, a technician's voice said frantically on the recording. Then came Hale's voice. It wasn't the calm, professional tone he had used on the stand. It was cold, calculating, and dripping with venom. Stand down. Tell them we are assessing. Let the little girl sweat. Let her team get chewed up a bit. Maybe when she comes back in body bags, the Pentagon will finally realize women don't belong in my war. No air support. That's a direct order. The recording clicked off. The silence in the tribunal room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The three generals on the panel stared at Hale with a disgust so profound it was palpable. Hale sat frozen in the witness chair, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. Ross didn't even ask a follow-up question. He just stared at Hale with utter contempt. No further questions for this officer. The trial ended in less than an hour. The verdict was swift and devastating. Lieutenant Chloe Harper was fully acquitted of all charges under Article 90, her actions deemed a justified self-defense response against a hostile, unprovoked assault. But the military justice system was not done. Before Colonel Gregory Hale could even leave the courtroom, military police moved in. He was immediately stripped of his command, arrested, and charged with dereliction of duty, conduct unbecoming an officer, and attempted manslaughter. 6 months later, Hale was dishonorably discharged and sentenced to 15 years in the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth. He lost his pension, his rank, and his freedom. Chloe Harper returned to Camp Phoenix 2 days after the acquittal. When she walked into the mess hall, the room fell silent. Master Chief Reynolds stood up. Petty Officer Brody stood up. Within seconds, every single operator in the room was on their feet. No one cheered, no one clapped. They just stood in absolute, silent reverence for the woman who had walked into the fire, refused to burn, and dragged the devil down with her. She had proven that the trident on her chest wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a promise, and heaven help the man who tried to test it. That is the brutal reality of the front lines. Respect isn't just given, it is ruthlessly demanded. What did you think about Lieutenant Harper's split-second decision? Did she cross the line? Or did she do exactly what a SEAL is trained to do when attacked? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more untold, high-stakes military stories just like this one, hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next one.